I actually am teaching a machine learning from scratch course still after doing this for years now. And it's amazing, it still gets a solid turnout. That it is still a building block to this generative AI technology. When you're teaching anything, whether you're writing or you're instructing, is you kind of marketing the topic and trying to sell it as being useful and relevant. And that's one thing I do make clear when I teach machine learning, even something as simple as linear regression and logistic regression or just a basic neural network. This is a building block to, how large language models train.
Welcome to the Tech Pubcast, a behind-the-scenes look at what it really takes to write and publish a technical book. I'm your host, Jess Haberman, literary agent, publishing consultant, and former acquisitions editor with nearly 20 years of experience publishing books. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Thomas Nield to the podcast. Hello, Thomas. Want to share a brief introduction?
Thanks, Jess. My name is Thomas Nield. So I've written a couple of books with several major tech publishers like O'Reilly, Packt. I have one coming out with Manning, Grokking Statistics, this fall. My background started in working in airlines primarily for almost 10 years in operations research, which operations research is just a fascinating space where you one of the things it does is try to algorithmically solve challenging business problems like scheduling and revenue and pricing. And I just became absolutely fascinated with that space. And it's inevitably intersected with machine learning and data science at some point. And so I obviously developed an interest in those topics too. And just through a sequence of events, it just ultimately gave me opportunities to become a book author. And I've written probably about, 4 books, I think, at this point, that went through publishers. And on top of that, I teach at University of Southern California on artificial intelligence system safety, as managing 2 startups, one being hardware, the other one being a software I developed for a new cybersecurity category. So it's amazing how going on the book publishing track and opened up doors, opened up opportunities. And in hindsight, it's something that I genuinely appreciate and the intangible qualities it has. So that's a little bit about my background, and just briefly, and how that intersected with me being a book author.
That's great. Yeah. So, Thomas and I have known each other for many years. I think our first work together was on Essential Math for Data Science book, if not probably some training courses before that when I was with O'Reilly. Thomas became like my go-to guy on writing projects, on training projects. Thomas is just so easy to work with. So it's been really incredible having, kind of a training partner over the years. You're just in all these really interesting spaces. You've got books on like SQL and math and you've done a lot of work with machine learning and AI, and now you've got statistics. So you've really spanned kind of like a lot of the foundational areas of data science and AI, which is so important now that we are living in a very different like kind of AI world. So you kind of have a unique background in having worked with many different publishers, Packt, O'Reilly, and Manning. So what have you learned about your experiences with those different publishers? Like, how were they different to work with?
That is something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed getting that opportunity to learn, because a lot of people, when they write one book, they kind of like, okay, I think I'm good for now, and they don't write another. But I've always just kind of been drawn back to writing another book, and I've been approached for opportunities to write a book. And I appreciate, and in terms of working with you as an editor, that was probably one of the best editing partnerships I've had, absolutely by far. And you and I worked on a lot of projects together, and it's just flooding memories back. and
Yeah.
and but each publisher is different, and 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 then it's not a matter of one publisher being better than another. It's more of which publisher is probably going to like the topic, the style you're going to write it, and who the audience is. So like O'Reilly has been a wonderful publisher to work with, and I've written 2 books with them, and I would definitely jump at opportunity to write for them again. And I've also written a book for Packt Publishing, and Packt is a great publisher. The thing that's unique about Packt, I have learned, is that if you have something that's a bit more niche or something that doesn't get a super giant mainstream audience, but there is a specific topic you want to focus on, you're going to have more luck writing for that subject. I've done a book, Learning RX Java for Pact, that I was immensely proud of, and it got us another second edition. Um, and so if there was ever a project I wanted to do where I wanted to write a book about a very specific topic, but it doesn't have such a huge mainstream audience, but I still wanted to get it out there anyway, they're definitely a publisher that to my mind makes absolute sense, and they're great to work with too. And then there's also Manning. So Manning also is a great publisher, and I just finished the book Rocking Statistics. I've enjoyed the editing process. There's a lot more reviewer feedback, so they get a huge crowdsourcing for reviewers, and it's immensely useful to get all the different perspectives and reactions to your work. Everybody who carries multiple PhDs to people that would be in the beginner category for your topic, and it's always interesting to see that spectrum of reactions in that process.
Yeah, that's a really important piece of the publishing journey for folks who are considering a traditional publisher is, your publisher will very likely have a tech editing or tech review part of the process where either they will ask you for recommendations for who should review your book, who you know in the space, who is an expert who can critique it, who can review it, kind of from an objective lens, or the publisher may have folks that they work with regularly who they might add to the process. So having a thick skin is important when it comes to having your writing reviewed and coming into that process with an open mind. Has that been hard at all for you to review critique, or is it generally kind of great because it's making your work better? Have you disagreed with, critiques that you've gotten from tech reviewers or from editors?
Oh, yeah, and of course, there's been reviewer feedback where you don't necessarily agree with what they said, but it does make you do try to find some signal in it saying, is there something that I need to soften up a little bit? Or did I convey something that could be seen as too absolute?
Mm,
And so even with feedback you don't agree with, you have to have enough of an introspective lens to say, did I not convey something well enough? And that caused this person to react the way they did. And there's just some people that are just highly opinionated and are highly opinionated, and that's fine. I certainly can be a very highly opinionated person, um, and that's one of the things I have to manage too, is manage my own opinions for the book and try to be as objective as possible. You certainly do have to have a degree of introspection, humility to say, did I miss something? We're all constantly trying to learn in this space. We're all trying our best to keep up. And sometimes it does help in feedback to see if I missed something. Oh, did something happen in the past year that I did not catch? And you have to look at it as a learning opportunity, ironically, as an author, and not so much as like, oh, they're attacking my expertise. So hopefully, so that's usually how I approach it. Occasionally there are people where I'm like, okay, you're just being highly opinionated about this, and you just kind of take those with a grain of salt. But you do look legitimately for, is there something could I written this a little bit better to where maybe they wouldn't have had that reaction? Was I being too absolute?
yeah, I think given the industry and the types of people who read and review books, you're going to get some pedantic, edits. But that's why it's important to have multiple reviewers because then you see the patterns. And it's true, like you don't have to take every piece of critical feedback you get. Ultimately the author has to decide what's worth changing, and your editor is a great partner
Mhm.
in that process. So you keep busy. You've got two little kids at home, you've got your startup, and you've got you're writing a book and you're teaching. Like, how do you balance it all? Like, do you have any sort of systems or habits when it comes to your writing that helps you kind of make sure that you're hitting your because you hit your
Yep.
deadlines,
Yep.
and you stay on top of things? Like, what's worked for you to enable you to do that?
Gosh, I ask myself that question every day, but somehow it all manages to get done. There are a couple of things that I do find helpful though. So, I'm self-employed and I have I'm doing multiple projects, and it's a blessing to be able to do that. My wife works too, so we have that classic problem of both parents need to work and we have kids at home, and we have we have a nanny and all that, which is helpful. When I really have to focus and get things done, I love going to coffee shops. Coffee shops are just a wonderful place to work. You just take your MacBook, go hunker down for a few hours, and it's amazing how much you can get done in like a 3-hour sprint, especially for writing a book. I mean, writing a book can seem like a gargantuan task. And it's like, oh my, and even every time I get a printed version of my book, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wrote all of this. This is like an inch or inch and a half thick. But it's amazing when you have something to say or you have a way of explaining things that you wish they were explained to you. It can all flow out. That being said, I do have writer's block from time to time, and it does happen. And usually it just helps to take a break, go for a hike, do something else. Project management, I love using Apple Reminders. I found out this hidden feature. It creates this wonderful Scrum board inside if you enable it.
Cool.
And or this Kanban board, or if you like project management cards. And just developing a ruthless sense of priority. If you're so blessed where you have so much work, you just start to learn to pick and choose projects that are worth your time. And it's really, for me personally, this is one of my weak points. I like to say yes to everything,
Yeah.
but there is a threshold where it's like, okay, I need to push something out and say, let's revisit this in 6 months and maybe I'll have some availability. But you have to be mindful of your own bandwidth and what's priority right now. And when you write a book, expect it to seriously take a toll on your bandwidth, but it can be very worth it.
I think one of the things that Thomas is very good at is sensing when things are going to be too much, when you've got to move things around, conflict comes up or an emergency comes up or whatever, alerting me or your editor or whoever, like right away. I mean, we've rescheduled this podcast because like you had to change priorities. And it's like, if you are writing a book and like you're sensing like, uh-oh, I'm going to miss a deadline, like let your editor know right away because like they want to work with you and they want to help you. You're not in trouble. Like, so it's super helpful for like, if you think about your editor as your partner and they're going to protect you too, like or your agent, same thing is like, if you've got an agent, like let them know right away. Cause like they'll help you like maneuver your schedule around with your publisher and like, just make sure that you're like going to succeed in the process. And like every publisher works in some buffer into their schedule because things come up all the time. So, so Thomas, you're really good at that, communicating well and letting people know like what you got to do.
I do my best, and because I don't want people to think I've gone AWOL or just went for a hike in Southeast Asia or something for 3 weeks without anybody knowing. So
It happens, and you'd be surprised. It happens frequently. Let's move on and talk a little bit about kind of your training work. You've done a lot of training and teaching for many years now, and I'm sure evolved quite a bit with the kind of emergence of Gen AI. And, I'm curious a little bit about, like, we say AI now and like mean Gen AI. How do you think about teaching traditional machine learning and kind of traditional AI topics? Are they still as important and relevant now that kind of Gen AI has emerged and LLMs and things like that?
this is something I contemplate, pretty regularly. And like, so I actually am teaching a machine learning from scratch course still after
Yeah.
doing this for years now. And it's amazing. It still gets a solid turnout. Learners kind of recognize this, that it is still a building block to this generative AI technology. The training, the stochastic rate descent, the machine learning component is still very much there. The large language model, generative AI technologies are just building more pieces on top of it. One of the things you have to do when you're teaching anything, whether you're writing or you're instructing, is you're kind of marketing the topic and trying to sell it as being useful and relevant. And that's one thing I do make clear. And I've had to adapt a little bit the messaging. Um, when I teach machine learning, even something as simple as linear regression and logistic regression, or just a basic neural network, I have to say multiple times, this is a building block to, how large language models train. The difference is going to be it just has billions of more parameters, not just a handful. So that's how I approach it. It's still relevant, and it's a building block to these more advanced technologies we're using, and I do my best to try to convey that to readers, learners, people I talk to.
people will ask, like, why do I need to know this? Obviously, if they're signed up, they probably like know that they need to know it or believe that's the case. So now that students and readers and authors and trainers have these Gen AI tools available to them, let's start with your training. How does that change the way you might think about like coding, examples or coding exercises, things like that?
It may sound slightly cliche to say, it's kind of like fire in many ways. It can be very useful and used in the right context. It can do some great things. If you abuse it too much, though, it can do some pretty damaging things. And by damaging, I'm not talking about Skynet or anything. I'm talking about quality of your work may go down. It may start to sound too generalized. But regarding how I approach teaching when it comes to coding and just my own instructional workflow and all of that, I tell people first and foremost, it's a very helpful reference. If I'm trying to write in Python or Rust, I say, hey, I need a function that does this, or I need to find a library that does this. And it's incredibly useful because all I have to do to kind of verify it, especially if it's a small focused code snippet, is to basically copy and paste it, see if there's any runtime errors, and also evaluate each line and say, okay, this kind of makes sense. And I'm not saying you should never vibe code. There are certain contexts where vibe coding can make sense. Like, hey, just generate a matplotlib chart for me. If it looks right, if it reflects the data, it's like, okay, great. And that's the other thing too, is you have to look at the context you're using it and will it propagate into a hazard of some kind? And if the answer is no, you can get away with leaning on the generative AI a lot more without doing a thorough review of it. But if it's going to go into a production server and it's handling customer data, yeah, you got to start to be a bit more mindful of what you're actually looking at. So it's a helpful reference. Occasionally can be helpful for vibe coding. And when it comes to writing, yes, it can be helpful to copy and paste paragraphs. Like, does this make sense? Is anything to everything technically accurate? And of course, I have enough expertise and good sense to see if it's misleading me or if it's not really capturing what I'm trying to say. But it can be a helpful spot check where most of the time it may be right a good fraction of the time, but it can also be wrong.
It's still really important to have some fundamentals. Would you still recommend that students learn Python from scratch? Or, does it shift a little bit in terms of, you need to have some maybe Python literacy. You need to be able to understand what a snippet of code is doing. Maybe they need to understand what an if statement is or a loop is, things like that. Like, where do you draw the line in terms of like how in the weeds, students should probably get nowadays in terms of like understanding how to code in Python?
Yes. So I actually spent 2 years learning Rust language, so I've kind of relearned all over again what it's like to learn and become proficient in a programming language. And this definitely applies to Python too. But with benefit of that recent experience, you absolutely should learn the fundamentals, the foundationals, all of the syntax, all of the rules and mindset of why a programming language how a programming language works. There's a gap between just learning the textbook stuff, which is still very important. And that is something you have to do to say, okay, I have this problem sitting in front of me. How do I actually apply this? And you're inevitably, depending on the type of project, going to encounter gaps from what the textbook foundationally gave you versus kind of the specific needs you have. And using a generative AI, again, as a reference to kind of pick out, oh, wait, there's a library that does this, or wait, there is something already in the standard library that does this, or wait, here's how I can localize a date and time. It can be really helpful to quickly pick those bits and pieces of knowledge because I remember like 15 years ago, I sound like such an old guy. It's like back in our day, we used Stack Overflow and you would post a question, you would go through the database of questions to go and find, I have a very specific task. How do I do it? And there's that joke about copying and pasting from Stack Overflow for a living. It's kind of funny to see how that got ported over to generative AI now. I think it's a dual track thing. You do need the foundational knowledge, but you do have to find resources to go and cherry pick some more obscure information for your task. And large language models, generative AI can be very useful for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about like Rust. What made you kind of jump in and learn Rust? What was the use case for you? Was this kind of like where did this start versus like Gen AI coming in? Did that help you learn? And kind of like how is Rust helping you?
Yeah, so I learned Rust out of a specific need I had. So, because I've done Java, I've done Python, I have a really soft spot for Kotlin, which is another Java-based language. But I learned Rust about 2.5 years ago, and it's not an easy language by any means. But the amazing thing is, once you kind of get past that initial learning curve, it pays enormous dividends because the reason it's hard is because it is very persnickety about everything being perfect before it's ran, and it catches a whole slew of things that traditionally would happen in runtime errors, but it stops it at compile time. It's like, nope, there could be a blank value there. You need to handle it, a null value. Um, and so I learned Rust because I had a specific project in mind. This is one of my current ventures, Sting Software, where I needed to develop an algorithm that ran in browser, but I didn't really want to use JavaScript necessarily because it wasn't performant enough. And two, it would not meet my maintainability needs because I wanted to keep this very lean. JavaScript was a little too transparent. I wanted something that could be, optimized into machine code. And I learned, oh, wait, there's this emerging thing that's been standardized in web browsers called WebAssembly. Yes, I could use C or C++ to target that. There is some Python technologies out there for WebAssembly as well. Rust was not my choice to learn, it felt like. It was just that's what everybody was using to target WebAssembly. So there's some curiosity always, but I learned it out of necessity just because that was kind of the standard. And over time, you learn to understand its thinking. You either learn to, appreciate what it achieves, or some people will just fall back to like, well, I really miss static typing because that's one thing I've never 100% gone over with Python is the dynamic typing. And I like Python, use it every day, very useful, and I still advocate for it heavily. But there's a part of me that just misses the static typing and the type safety and all of that.
Yeah. My Anaconda friends will be pissed if I don't shout out to PyScript for
Yes, yes.
Python in the web, but
Yes,
yeah,
I played with that too. It's really cool, and I've actually used it a handful of times too.
that's cool. That's really cool.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit like about your current ventures. I see mirror updates occasionally on the flight simulator. Like it's just it's such an area I don't know much about. So tell me a little bit about the flight simulation, right, that you've
Yeah,
been working on.
so I have a piece of hardware called the Yamen,
Right.
and actually, I have a controller right here, a prototype.
Cool.
Uh,
Yeah.
it is basically an Xbox controller
Does look familiar.
and a plane cockpit had a baby. And so it has like a little rudder mechanism right here, uh, as you see right here, so that it alternates back and forth just like pedals on an aircraft. So that's been doing great. It has a partnership with Microsoft Xbox right now, and it's also been sold on Sporty's Pilot Shop and everything. And the other venture I have is Sting Software, which I kind of mentioned earlier, and that's just basically a software to kind of help mitigate shadow IT. So it'll
Mhm.
catch unauthorized downloads. It looks for legally binding language and just kind of alerts the user, hey, slow down. And it will kind of send a notification to the administrator. It also will monitor, like, for example, AI usage. So if your organization's worried about people uploading sensitive data, AI tools that weren't authorized or sanctioned, it will capture those events too. So that is the other event that was a surprising amount of work, but it's been working great, and the precision and recall metrics have pleasantly surprised me. On top of everything else I've been doing, I woke up one morning in 2020 and said, "I'm really good at algorithm and software development. You know what I should do? Hardware."
That's amazing. Like, so do you know how to fly a plane?
I am not a pilot. I understand the principles, and that was kind of one of the things that led me to build this thing was I was teaching at University of Southern California. I was working with a lot of people with aviation backgrounds, fighter pilots and all of that, teaching people from 3 and 4 letter government agencies around the world. But one of the things I wanted to do is like, okay, I need to get a bit more proficient in avionics, like, plane autopilots and how they work. And I was doing that with X-Plane, which is a flight simulator. And I was trying really hard to make an Xbox controller work because I did not want to turn my desk into a cockpit. And that's where the spark kind of came. It's like, oh, there needs to be a handheld form factor and give it all the missing functions that should be to control an aircraft. So that's kind of how that all happened.
That's great. Going back to Shadow IT and Shadow AI, I'm sure that is exploding right now with, all the folks who recognize the value of being able to work with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and they're probably not all waiting for their IT department to give them approval to go ahead and use it. I think this is a big area for Anaconda too. We provide the sort of secure foundation for software development especially with Python. Are you seeing kind of like a big demand now, kind of with the Gen AI tools that are out?
Yes, there is. We've had for the longest time this idea of move fast and break things. We go through these cycles of, rapid innovation, and then, oh shoot, we need to kind of wrangle things in and start getting some order here. You can make an argument that that's healthy and just normal. But there's definitely with this generative AI stuff. There's opportunity for productivity for sure and the right use cases and everything. It's just kind of a whiplash to say, whoa, everybody slow down, stop, stop, stop. It's like, okay, we need to do some governance here. Like, what's that? Governance? Really? We're also dealing with a lot of unintended consequences. And how do we handle that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a competitive job market too. People are trying to just boost their resumes and their skills as much as possible. And AI may not take your job, but if you are not like if you're not very fluent with Gen AI tools, like someone will take your job. Someone who is will take your
Yes.
job. How do folks find out more about you? Anything else that you'd like to plug or let people know that you've got coming up?
Sure. Best way to follow me and reach me is my LinkedIn. That just seems to be the platform that's just been stickiest with me. Just other things to plug my book, Rocking Statistics, which we talked about earlier. It should be coming out by this fall. I have a YouTube channel, 3 Minute Data Science, where I kind of use three blue, one browns animation framework to do mathematics, statistics, machine learning explanations. I'm glad we got a chance to talk, and thanks for allowing me to share my book too.
Yeah, absolutely. Preview chapters for Thomas Nield's book are available on Manning's website, and I'll include a link to that so y'all can go check it out. You can pre-order Thomas's book. Thanks so much for joining the podcast. It's been like such a pleasure talking with you again, and just like I always learn new things from you, so it's really been fantastic. And if you want to hear more from guests like Thomas, please subscribe and stay tuned for more guests very soon. But Thomas, thanks again for being here, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah.